Hi guys, welcome to our MAP introduction meeting. It's Professor Davis here, and I just wanted to take the time to welcome you to our meeting. For any of you that are watching the recorded version of this meeting, thank you so much for tuning in. And we've got a lot of stuff to cover today as far as the project goes. But I think this meeting is really beneficial to you because it will help you to see what's expected of you during the project and also give you just a better understanding of the project as a whole. Because I know it can seem a little daunting at first, writing such a lengthy paper, we'll say that. But once you start rolling with these perspectives, you'll see how you really start coming up with all this information, and the 6 to 8 page requirement is not such a big deal any further. So let's go ahead and jump in. All right, first off, like I said, I just wanted to take the time to welcome you to the meeting. I am Professor Davis, and so it's nice to meet all of you finally, face to face at least. And if you do have any questions at all after you've finished watching the meeting in its entirety, I do encourage you to reach out to me in the course, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. But that is a picture of me and my husband there. I just always like to throw some tidbits in there every now and then to give you a face to put with a name and just kind of help to humanize me a little bit more on the other end of this screen. So I know that a lot of times when you take online courses, it's hard to remember that there is a human instructor on the other side. And so I'm here. And if you do have any questions at all, feel free to let me know. And it's been a joy to read your thoughts so far in the course. I'd like to add that as well. So just keep those discussions going. Keep those very creative ideas going in your papers. I just always enjoy reading what you guys have to come up with each week. All right, so our agenda, the things we're going to cover today, we're going to go over the basics of the MAP, and you're going to hear me refer to it as the MAP throughout this meeting. And what I mean by that is the Media Analysis Project, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing, is analyzing a piece of I don't want to say media, because when we think media, we think of, we think of the news and things like that. But we're going to be analyzing either a film, a television show, or a famous work of art. So you'll hear me cover that throughout the meeting. So we're going to analyze that, though, using the 6 perspectives that I'm going to discuss in just a moment. And that's going to be the personal perspective, the historical perspective, technical perspective, ethical perspective, cultural perspective, and critical perspective. So I'm going to go in depth discussing what each of those perspectives are, how you can apply them to either the film, television show, or famous work of art that you've chosen to analyze, and so forth. So by the end of this meeting, you should have a much greater understanding of what to expect from the project, what's required of you, and so forth. Okay, so after that, though, we're going to do a project breakdown. And what I mean by that is I'm going to go step by step, week by week, and tell you what's going to be due over the next few weeks in the course. So right now, we are just moments away, basically, from beginning the project. The project as a whole begins in week 6, and that's where you're going to type up a very short project proposal for me and submit that. I'll talk about what that means in this meeting, and then we'll flow from there. So the project goes from week 6 to week 10 in the course. After that, again, we're going to talk about the project timeline. So that's kind of what I was just talking about there. And then, of course, questions, comments, any questions you might have, just let me know. Okay. So what is the MAP? Well, the MAP stands for Media Analysis Project, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing during this project. So we're going to either choose, and it's very important that you hear me on this, okay, because I don't want to send your project proposal back and go, remember, that wasn't on the approved list. You can either choose a film, a television show, or a famous work of art to analyze for this project. A lot of times students will ask me about, or just not adhere to the guidelines, and they'll send something that's like a news article. That's not what's meant by this project. You can use either a television series, not just one episode, but an entire series, a television series, a film. If it's part of a trilogy, you should only choose one of the films, so forth like that. So it's only one film or one television series, or one famous work of art, such as Starry Night, or I'm trying to think of the Mona Lisa. Okay, so very important that you you realize that that's it. That's the options. Now, I know in the course, I will say this, I know in the course that it does say that you could choose a website. I hate to go against the guidelines that is put forth by the course designers that we have, but I don't allow students to do websites. And the reason is, of course, I used to. I've taught this course for many, many, many years now. And I used to allow students to choose a website because it was given as an option. But the problem was they were never able to fully execute the project. They misunderstood a lot of things. They were unable to get a lot of things. And so ultimately, they had a poor grade on the project, mainly just because we allowed them to do a website. So I just pretty much reject that now, just because my students just find it too difficult. So you can choose, again, one film or one television series or one famous work of art for this project. If you choose any of those things, you're going to get approved for the topic, okay? Now, sometimes people will just send me something that says, I choose photography. Well, that lets me know you didn't view the meeting, because I'm very clear on you have to choose something specific, meaning a few students do choose a very famous photo to analyze. So that might be, gosh, I can't think the proper name of it right now, but the famous photo of the, I'll tell you what, I'll choose a different one. How about that? Afghan Girl. Okay, most people are familiar with Afghan Girl. That is the photo of the very young girl with the very striking green eyes. She was, well, I won't go too much into the history. You guys get it. But anyway, she was featured on the cover of National Geographic many years ago. The subject was revisited some many years after that, once she became an adult. And so some people, in that situation, you would only choose one of those photos to analyze. So some people like to choose a photo like that, and that's okay, as long as it's something very, very famous that you can get a lot of information from. A photo you shot, not going to be approved. Photography as a whole is not an option. You would have to choose one specific famous photo to analyze. Now, sometimes people ask me, well, I have this artist friend of mine who did this piece, and I'd like to use one of their photographs or one of their paintings. That's fine, as long as you can get enough information. Sometimes it's really difficult when it's not something that's out there and has been researched. It's difficult to find research to integrate into your paper. So that's something to keep in mind there. So what I urge students to do, let's just go back. What I urge students to do is to choose a famous film, a famous television series, or a famous work of art. It makes life so much easier on you on this project, trust me. Okay, so going back here, we are doing the media analysis project. I'm going to be referring to it as the MAP throughout this meeting. And this week we're going to be introduced to the 6 analytical perspectives for analyzing media by author and theorist David Lodge from his book Small World. So you're going to be learning more about the perspectives this week, and also in this meeting, because I'm going to cover the perspectives for you so you'll fully understand. And these perspectives that we're going to be discussing today are the same perspectives that you're going to be reading about this week, and that's going to form how you're going to actually create your media analysis project. Okay, so what are these perspectives? Well, the 6 analytical perspectives for analyzing media are the personal perspective, and the personal perspective is basically going to be your gut reaction to this piece. So how did this piece make you feel the very first time you saw it? What was your gut reaction to it? And I'm going to go into detail on these in a minute with some great examples to help better illustrate. The next perspective, and these perspectives will flow in your paper in this order. So you'll go over the personal perspective before moving to the historical perspective. And with the historical perspective, you're going to be basically discussing historical elements to this film, this television series, or this famous work of art. The next perspective will be the technical perspective. So basically, what went into the creation of this film, television series, or famous work of art. The ethical perspective, what ethical dilemmas are present with this? What moral responsibilities were there? Things that have to do with ethics would fall into this perspective. The next one is going to be the cultural perspective, and that's going to be, how did it impact society? Either either a previous society, you know, if it's an older piece, or how's it reflected in today's society. So those are different ways you can actually cover that perspective. And then the final perspective is going to be the critical perspective. So after you've spent all of this time analyzing this film, this television series, or this famous work of art, what is your reasoned opinion of it? Did your opinion change since the personal perspective, or since you basically first viewed it as a whole? And that's pretty much it, guys. It's a 6 to 8 page paper. It needs to be, sorry, it needs to be proper APA format. So you're going to have a properly formatted title page, of course, with the headers and everything that you need there. Author's note at the bottom of the title page. You're going to need an abstract, and then you're going to flow into the paper. Now, how do you begin the actual content portion of the paper? I give you two options on this. One, you can start with a very short, less than a half page paragraph to kind of help you go into the first perspective, if that makes you feel more comfortable as a writer. It cannot be any longer than a half page, though. If you submit me a paper that is a page and a half for an introduction, I'm going to take points off. So just being clear on that. Less than a half page for an introduction, if that's what you want to do, and then by a half page into the paper, you should start the personal perspective. Okay. Now, for some students, they just go, you know, I don't need that. I just want to start off with my perspectives. That's fine. So you'll start off with the personal perspective as the very first thing. Go into that. Either way, the perspectives will flow in order. So personal perspective, historical, technical, ethical, cultural, and then critical. Now, when you go into each perspective, so you've started the paper, you've either started with less than a half page introduction paragraph, or you've started with the personal perspective as a whole. Once you fully cover the personal perspective, you're going to move into that historical perspective. But before you go into the historical perspective, you need to have a subtitle there that says historical perspective in bold. A lot of times students ask me, do I want this left aligned or centered? It really doesn't matter to me as long as it's there. I always say left aligned looks a little cleaner, but however you want to do it's fine. So, so you will have in bold historical perspective as a subtitle. All of your subtitles need to be only 12-point font, just like the content in your paper. All of the content in your paper should only be 12-point font. So don't make these huge 16-point font size subtitles. That's not proper formatting. They only need to be 12-point font, just like your content. The only difference is you're going to put a subtitle above that section in bold and then go into the historical perspective. So then you'll fully discuss the historical perspective. Once you're done discussing the historical perspective, you'll move into the technical perspective, but not before putting a subtitle in bold above that section that says technical perspective in bold, and then going into the technical perspective. And you will follow that process all the way to the end of the paper. Now, the paper will pretty much end with the critical perspective. So I don't want a page of a conclusion. Okay, I want it to end. I want the 6 to 8 pages in the paper to be the perspectives. Okay, not a page and a half introduction and a page and a half conclusion. I need it all to be 6 to pages of the perspectives. Okay, so, and of course after that, then you will include a reference page, and I'll talk about how many references you need in a minute. You are required to have outside research in this paper, and a lot of it, so start researching now. And one more thing I want to point out, so if you tune me out, this is very important. Sometimes people like to have images to go along with their paper. So you might want to send me a picture of the Mona Lisa, or a picture of something that's going on in the film or whatever. If you want to send that, it does not need to be in the content portion of your paper. That's not proper APA style. So do not insert any images in that 6 to 8 pages that we're discussing the perspectives. No images at all. All that should be there is 12-point font size content. That's it. Okay. Now, if you do want to include an image, though, it would go in an appendix section after your reference page. That's proper formatting. So after your reference page, you'd make a page that says appendix at the top, a little subtitle above there in bold, 12-point font size, and then you can include your photo there. Okay, so how do you refer to that in your paper? Well, in your paper, if you want me to look at an image, you'll say see appendix. Okay, it's as easy as that. So That's how you do that. All right. So now that we've covered a few little ins and outs there, let's move on. So the personal perspective, that is where you're going to start off analyzing your film, your television series, or your famous work of art. So let's discuss what that means. The personal perspective is your gut reaction to it. How did it make you feel? This is where you're going to describe your thoughts and your initial personal insights into this film, this television series, or this famous work of art. So how did it make you feel? What did it make you think? Remember that you should be describing your very first initial reaction to this film, this television series, or this famous work of art. Now, if I were going to write a paper, let's say on the television series Friends, because it's an older sitcom that's off the air now, but you've probably seen repeats of it on television, or if you're like me, you saw it in real time on TV. So, but it has been off the air for quite some time now. But let's say I'm using Friends, and I'm going to give you that example throughout this meeting. So we'll kind of follow that timeline there. So let's say that I'm using the television series Friends, and I'm starting off, and I want to apply the personal perspective into my paper because that's the first perspective I need to cover. Well, I would start off probably by discussing that the very first time I saw the sitcom Friends, I was not a fan at all. I thought it was just a bunch of young, hip New Yorkers living the life, never really having to work too much, just kind of having these huge apartments, but really not having clear jobs or things like that. So I just thought it was a little cliche at first. That's before I actually watched it. So that was my gut reaction, and I'm going to really talk about that here in this perspective. I'm going to talk about how it made me feel, what it made me think, and so forth. So that's where I'd start there, and then I'm going to go into the other perspectives after that. And I might want to talk about how the first time I watched an episode, I kind of changed my mind, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. And funny thing is, I actually got hooked on the show, and now I got my husband hooked on the reruns, and we own all the seasons. So funny how that works, right? Okay, and then after I discuss that fully, I'm going to move into the historical perspective. So above this section, I'll put historical perspective as a subtitle in bold, only 12-point font size, and I'll move into the historical perspective. So the historical perspective, we're going to talk about when was this film, this television series, or this famous work of art, when was it created? What are the historical elements that are present in this film, television series, or famous work of art? How does it tie into our history with historical elements? And so let's say that I'm still, of course, doing the television series Friends here. Well, some of the historical things I might note are there's one particular episode where they are talking about he was a famous politician, and he was in New York, and they were just oohing and awing over how good looking he was and so forth. And to me, this is a historical element because he's not in office nowadays, because this has been many years ago since this show aired. So that's a piece of history in there. So I could talk about that as a historical element. I could also talk about the fact that other little things, such as the way that the apartment is decorated, is definitely reminiscent of 90s decor. So I could tell that this show was probably filmed in the 90s. And there's so many other historical things in this show that really anchor when this television series was created, when it aired, and so forth. It reflects that. So those are some things I would talk about in this section. Now, let's say that you've chosen to analyze a very famous painting. Okay, so going back to the personal perspective, you would talk about how it made you feel, what it made you think, and so forth. Now, as far as the historical perspective goes, you could talk about first off, when was it created? You could also talk about any style that it imitates. So, is it using pointillism, or what type of technique was used? So you could talk about a little bit of the because of the time period it was created, this was the popular art movement at the time. That's why this piece reflects such, and so forth. You could also talk about the historical elements, such as, let's say we're talking about I'm trying to think of something. Let's say we're talking about the Mona Lisa, and we're talking about the way she's dressed, and you might want to talk about that from a historical standpoint. She is probably in that garment because of the time period in which it was painted. So these are different things that you can definitely discuss. Going back to the television show, though, you could also talk about how this television series Friends imitates the typical sitcom and the way it flows and the way it's shot, which we don't want to get too much into the way it's shot because we'll talk about that in the technical perspective. But you kind of see where I'm going with that. So anything that's of historical relevance is going to tie in here. Now, I do want to make one note really quickly because this is important because I always have one student each term that does this. Remember that the point of this paper is not to discuss the plot of the show or the characters' dialogues and so forth. I don't want to know any of that, okay? It's only analyzing it from a visual perspective. So we're only focusing on these perspectives. I don't care about the plot line. I don't care about any of that stuff. Don't quote the characters unless you're pointing it towards a perspective. You can do that. But I don't need to know the continued dialogue throughout or the history of the character's relationship. Not needed. Don't want that. Okay? Only focus on each perspective that I'm going over. Okay. So moving on. After I've completely discussed the historical perspective, I'm going to put a subtitle above this that says technical perspective. And that's what I'm going to start obviously talking about, the technical perspective. So the technical perspective is how this film, this television series, this famous work of art, how was it created? Okay, so let's go back to the sitcom Friends. So I've gotten to this point in my paper and I want to discuss the technical perspective. I'm going to talk about things such as how it was produced, who directed it, what techniques were used to create this television show. Was it shot in front of a live studio audience? Was it shot on location? Was it in a studio? If so, where? Those things. I'm going to also want to talk about things such as the equipment that was used to film the show. So what camera angles were used? What equipment was used? What are their special effects and so forth? And if so, how were these created? So anything that went into the creation of the show is what I want to talk about here. And I really want to go in depth with those things. So it's going to require a lot of research on your part. Now, if you're talking about, let's say, going back to the Mona Lisa, because some people might choose art instead of a film or a television series. So you would talk about how the painting was created, what's the size of the canvas, what type of paints were used. Is that, you could actually go into that a lot. The products that were used to actually create the piece itself. You would want to talk about the techniques that were used, types of brush strokes and so forth. Maybe even go down to the paintbrushes that were used, how were those made? So because during that time period, they're constructed differently than they are nowadays. So research again will help you on this. You'll also want to talk about basically just anything that goes into how this was created. Okay, so this is the technical perspective. After you fully discuss this, you're going to move into the next perspective. And the next perspective is the ethical perspective. So what is the moral responsibility there? Was the person who created this film, this television series, this famous work of art, were they morally responsible on everything? Were there any ethical dilemmas that were in play that, that we need to talk about here? And if you don't see anything that's a major one, for instance, I'm, doing this paper on the television series Friends. It's not a very rough show, but there are some things that I could talk about that could be, for some people, a little bit sticky in the area of ethics. So let's see here. They talk about on the show. Well, first off, in the show they do a lot of premarital sex, and they have women and men living together, and all those things that are common, obviously in today's society, but they still lead to ethical questions that we could discuss here. So we could make some discussion on that. Now, if you're doing a more of a drama type show, you're doing I don't know, the first 48 hours or something like that. I mean, there's a lot of things that come into play as far as ethics there. So we would be able to really come up with something there. Now, let's say that you are doing the going back to my painting, the Mona Lisa. So well, first off, you could talk about how, and this I'm sure is, I don't this is the case. I'll say this. This is the case with a lot of artists during that time period. Now, a lot of them were painting it, ladies, especially of the aristocracy. So you had very drastic differences on this. They were either painting an aristocrat, basically, or they were often painting paid prostitutes because it was really cheap to get a model that way. They would pay the prostitute to sit for a painting. They would paint them, and that's how they would come up with their subject. Okay, so obviously, this is not applying to the Mona Lisa, but if you were doing a different style painting, you could talk about that here. Now, let's go back to the Mona Lisa, though. So how would I apply it to the Mona Lisa? Well, one thing I'd probably want to talk about here is the fact that the smirk she has on her face in the painting is something that's been a big controversy for years now. People want to know why she's smirking. There's a lot of theories out there on it, a lot of conspiracy theories type stuff. So this is something that you could kind of play with here as far as ethics goes. So just a little bit there, and you can fully go into that perspective. This is the fourth perspective in your paper. You'll type above this section, excuse me, in a bold subtitle, ethical perspective, before you move into the next perspective, which is the cultural perspective. And in the cultural perspective, you want to talk about this film, this television series, this famous work of art, its place in culture as a whole. Now, if I was going to go back to the sitcom Friends, this show had a huge pop culture following, huge pop culture following. So much so that one of the characters named Rachel on the show, which is Jennifer Aniston, had a very popular haircut during that television show while the series aired, excuse me. And women were actually flocking to their local beauty salons to get, the character's name was the name of the haircut, to get the Rachel. So people would go get the Rachel, and that's, you know, that's one piece of culture there. I mean, it just had such a following. Also, other cultural elements. If you watch the show, you will see lots of product placements, such as Snapple. They drank Snapple on the show a lot of times. You can see different products like that, and you can, at that time period when the show was filmed, Snapple was a big deal. So people drank a lot of Snapple back then. So you might want to talk about how that product placement ties into the culture and so forth. Just some ideas there. So another thing is this show is very prevalent in the Western cultural way of thinking. So again, we could also go into the whole way they're living in New York, the way things are set up, such as the two women are living together across the hall from the two men, and they're all friends together, and they hang out together all the time. And sometimes the guys come over, and the girls are still asleep. You know, all these different things are going on. Those are things that you may not see in cultures outside of Western culture. But in the Western culture, that's very common for us. I mean, I had a guy roommate growing up or not growing up, but in college. And, you know, those are things that you see more in a Western culture than you would other cultures around the world. So we could talk about how that's a part of our culture and how things that are shown in the show like that can tie in here. So that's some interesting perspectives there. So this is the fifth perspective. You'll type cultural perspective as a subtitle above this before moving into the final perspective, which is the critical perspective. So after you've spent all of this time researching this paper and writing this paper and thinking about these papers from all these wonderful perspectives, now's your time to say, did my opinion change from when I hadn't researched it at all and I just enjoyed watching the film or the show or just looking at the piece of art? How has my opinion changed of it? It may not change at all. For most students, they'll say, you know what, I've got a deeper understanding here of this. I've never really thought about things on this level. So you're going to want to talk about, has your thoughts changed since you first saw it? Are your thoughts different than how, you know, you initially viewed it, and so forth? So that's where you'll talk about here. And that's it, guys. That's where you would end your paper. So again, you'll end with the critical perspective. That's it. And then, of course, you'll have your reference page. And if you want to add an appendix for any images you want to do, you'd put that there. So, all right. So with that in mind, let's move on to the breakdown. So starting in week 6 of the course and going through week 10 is when you're going to be doing this project. And again, I know the course says you can choose media that's print, film, television, or internet. Guys, I'm telling you right now, the ones that I approve are going to be a famous work of art, a television series, or a film. And again, if the film is a part of like a trilogy or something like that, you're only to choose one film. So it's very important that you understand that. A lot of this stuff I'm just gonna highlight for you here because we've already talked about it. So you have to apply all the 6 perspectives in your paper in that order. Don't forget that you need a properly formatted title page. You'll move into the paper portion, which is going to be the 6 to 8 pages. You're going to move into that. You can either start with an introduction paragraph that's less than a half page, or you can jump straight into the perspective. Before you discuss each perspective, you're going to have a bold subtitle above it, either left aligned or centered, I don't mind, in bold that says personal perspective or historical perspective or so forth. And then you're going to fully go into that perspective before moving to the next and repeating the same process. At the end of the paper, you'll include a properly formatted reference page, and then you will include an appendix section if it's needed. Okay, so your paper has to be a detailed analysis. I don't want plot. I don't want it to be like a paper talking about the characters, relationships, and so forth. I don't need any of that. I don't want these gigantic block quotes all throughout the paper. It needs to be your thoughts, your thoughts. There should be no bulleted lists in your paper. It should be just paragraph form, okay? Just throwing some things out there because these are things I've seen students do in the past that I usually go, you shouldn't do this here, okay? It needs to be 6 to 8 full type pages, double spaced, that's normal. No images, no photos of the content portion of your paper. If you want to include that, you include it on an appendix section after your reference page. Please follow APA guidelines on this paper. That is going to be really looked at here as well. Also, don't forget those subtitles above each perspective. So please clearly identify each perspective as you discuss it by creating the subtitle, 12-point font, no larger, such as personal perspective, or whatever it is that you're discussing at the time above that perspective, making it clearly identifiable, okay? Okay, so you have to have at least 4 outside pieces of research and then a reference to the actual film, television series, or famous work of art itself. So that's a total of 5 references. All 5 references should also be included in your paper, and what I mean by that is you need in-text citations in your paper. Okay, if you're not sure how to do that, check out the APA information I've provided you. All sources have to be cited in text in the paper as well as on a reference page. Your final paper has to have proper grammar and punctuation. That is a part of your grade. I expect college level writing, and I know you guys can do that. If you need help, you can always check out our tutoring services, and they'll be happy to help you with that. And of course, if you have any questions at all, you can reach out to me in the course. I'm always happy to help you. The timeline is, like I said, in week 6, you're going to have the project introduction, which is basically what I'm doing for you right now. But it's going to be in written form in week 6. And you're going to do your topic selection. You have to have my approval on your topic before you can proceed. And that's because I want to make sure that you're not creating extra work for yourself, that you've chosen what you need to choose and that you're on the right track. So what you're going to do for that is you're going to include a properly formatted title page, one short paragraph discussing what topic you've chosen specifically. Remember, you can't just say, I've chosen art. You need to say, I've chosen the Mona Lisa, and here's why. You can't just say, I've chosen television. No, you need to say, I've chosen the sitcom Friends, and this is why. Same for a film. Don't forget your title page on this, okay? Project proposals are due the Sunday of week 6. Once you've received my approval, then you can proceed with your research. That's going to move us to week 7. In week 7, you're going to have an outline that's due. So you're going to create an outline that's going to help you to design your paper. Outlines help us with organization of our thoughts. And so that's what you're going to be doing. You're going to create an outline with main points and subpoints you want to make. You're going to start integrating research into that outline. That's going to help you to sit down with the outline and write your paper. That's the purpose of it. It's not extra busy work for you guys. It's It's so that you can look at your outline and go, this is how I had my thoughts flowing. Now I can write my paper and elaborate on it. Okay, so you're going to find a sample outline for you in the week 7 area. Please mirror this format. Any main points you want to make in your outline should be a capitalized Roman numeral. Any subpoints that you want to make under that main point is going to be capitalized letters. And if you need additional points on that, then it would be numbers. So just follow the sample outline. If the formatting's a little off on the outline, it's not a big deal. I just want to see that you're understanding this. Do not turn in your written out paper as your outline. That is not an outline. You need to create an outline for this. If you want to start working on your paper, that's wonderful. You should. But do not submit your paragraphed paper as your outline. You need to create an outline for this, okay? That's week 7. In week 8, you're going to submit your rough draft to me, and those will be due by the Sunday of week 8. And that's where I'm going to go through your paper and highlight some things that I can see just right off the bat that we need to work on before you submit the final paper. So it's up to you to make sure that you're fully reading through it, but I will highlight a few things for you and say, perhaps you should do this here, elaborate more on this, and so forth. Okay, I won't point out everything we need to work on because that would take us, a lot of time, and I wouldn't be able to get it back to you as quickly. But I will point out many things that we need to work on still, and then it'll be up to you to give it a final go through before the final paper submission. In week 9, but that's one of the beauties. In week 8, we submit the rough draft. I give you a few comments. In week 9, you'll post it for your peers to review, and then they can give you some comments to work with as well. So week 9, you're going to have a discussion that says, you're going to have 2 discussions actually. You'll have your regular class discussion, and you'll have your peer review assignment. For your peer review, you're going to post your initial post or just be your revised paper, okay? Response posts you make that week will be you reading through another student's paper and then critically evaluating their work, saying some things they did well, some things they need to improve on, some things you saw that they might want to change around before the paper's submitted. And then in week 10, your final paper's due by that Sunday of week 10. So by now, you should have made all of your revisions based on the comments I gave you as well as your fellow classmates, and you're just ready to submit your paper. Okay, so please make sure that you have saved the 2 sample papers I've given you in your email. I believe they're both art papers. I'm sorry, I don't have any film or television papers at present. The art papers, these were just great examples. So honestly, the reason I'm sending this to you is just to kind of give you an idea of what you should be doing. But again, everything I covered in the meeting is what you should be doing. And also to help you to see the formatting. The formatting they did was excellent. So that's what I'm looking for you. I'm looking for the exact same formatting that they're doing. Okay, mirror the formatting, and that includes the subtitles, all of that was perfect in these papers, and that's why I'm sending it to you. Otherwise, at all, guys, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help you in any way possible. I can't wait to see what you guys come up with on this project. It's so much fun. So take your time, enjoy it. Let me know if you have any questions, and have a great week. Thank you.